Yeah, so every year I speak to my annual general meeting, which represents over $1 trillion of capital in the room, and I deliver a speech called The State of the Planet. This is a massively abbreviated version of that, but let's just jump right in. So what you see in front of you is the world's largest wetland. It's the Pantanal in Brazil, Paraguay, and Bolivia. And it is 42 million acres in extent, about 65,000 square miles. So if you made that into a square, it'd be 255 miles by 255 miles on a side. It's enormous. But also this past year, it was on fire. And something like this should already drive a bunch of dissonance. The wetland was on fire, right? Wetlands are defined as lands that are continuously submerged, or at their driest, they are fully saturated with water most of the time. These are not the landscapes that are supposed to burn. But yes, this past year, the largest and most biodiverse wetland on planet Earth burned, and great article on it. You can see the bottom part is what it looked like it was burning, and the top part is what large swaths of it look like now. Now, that's not the only place that we're losing, right? We're also losing, besides all these places on land that were unthinkable that we would lose them, we're also losing a lot in the oceans and across all the species. So up here is a graph from NOAA which shows the kind of temperature and bleaching risk for corals in those locations around the world. And this is a snapshot in late 2024, which is on the tail end of 2 years of record ocean temperatures. Now, the estimate is currently that in 2024, between 30 to 40% of all coral reefs on planet Earth got into that temperature range that leads to mass bleaching and reef collapse. We actually don't know what percentage of that we fully lost already, but it's very substantial. We're in the years where the largest and the biggest proportions of nature that we're going to lose are going to be lost in this decade and the next decade. And I don't know what historians are going to end up calling these decades, but I would propose that we call them the big lost decades. Because once you lose most of coral reefs on planet Earth, and we're actually on pace to basically wipe out coral reefs as an ecosystem from planet Earth by 2055, then you can't lose any more, right? I mean, these are the decades where it happens, and then after that, you can't lose past zero. And you can see, talked about stuff on land, we talked about stuff in the oceans. The graph on the bottom comes from a nature, it's a short paper on how we're doing in terms of biodiversity protection for our threatened and endangered species. In quick summary, if you guys don't want to read the whole paper, going really badly, protecting hardly anything. Now, fortunately, the markets have been responding a bit, and as mentioned in the intro, I'm the managing partner of @ONE Ventures, so I work in the venture space, and these numbers are from venture capital. So the good news is that, hey, billions of dollars have kind of flooded into the space, but I think it comes with a little bit of nuance there as well, because you can see that things like spiked up in early 2021, and then it declined for 8 quarters in a row, so 2 years straight of decline, finally leveling out around now, a bit higher than where it started. But if you think about it, it's not that the climate problems became less problematic during those years. It's just the market got energetic, and then it got skittish, and now it's kind of leveling out again. We need to have more staying power on these sorts of things. We can't, the kind of capital and the kind of patience that's going to take to go solve these problems is much larger than what we have been currently applying. In addition, the proportion is kind of messed up too. So if you look at the cumulative climate investments by vertical, you'll see about 30% of it has gone into transportation, and specifically for cars and light trucks. Now, that represents only 6% of the emissions mix, right? So if 30% of your capital is going to go deal with 6% of the problem, you're 5x, overcapitalized on that thing, which actually means that there's entire other sectors which are driving more emissions than light vehicles that are under-indexed by 10x, under-indexed by 5x in terms of the capital that it's seeing. So even though there's good news that the market is responding, we're responding in these kind of uneven ways, and we're responding in ways that aren't necessarily in the profile of the problem that we're actually trying to solve. Now, I think this is the really kind of critical graph, and I'm sure you guys have seen variations of this many, many times. All those trajectories are basically trajectories for average temperature rise by the year 2100. So I don't think I need to explain what this graph is deeply to an audience that's sophisticated like you guys. But I will mention what I annotated on top of the graph. So the red line is today, simple enough. And then the blue bars, that first blue bar is roughly the time period that every single person in this room will die. And the bar after that is roughly the timeline where all of your kids, if you have young children, will die. And the bar after that is when their kids will die. And the bar after that is when their grandkids will die. Right? Somewhere between those last two bars, if we stick with it, if we actually push really hard, the ice caps will start to refreeze. That's the time scale that we're talking about now. Right? There was a time period where we could have addressed all this stuff in 20 years, 25 years. That was 1985 when Carl Sagan gave a congressional testimony. There was a way to go head it all off in a quarter century. By the time we signed the Paris Accord, we were signed up for at least 100 years. Now we're in the category of 160 to 200 years before we get to the point that the ice caps, reach maximum melt and start to refreeze. That would be my indication that we're actually moving toward repair. Now, that doesn't mean everything's fixed. That's the start of repair. Then there's a pretty long time period as things get back to something like the world that we inherited in the first place. And I think it's really important to understand the magnitude of the work that we're doing here. It is something that, if we succeed, will span 2 centuries. And it begs a really important question that I hardly hear talked about at these sorts of events. Because whenever you're talking about, with business people, with entrepreneurs, with investors, all that sort of thing, we talk about scale all the time. Scale, scale, scale. But all that we mean by scale is scale in space, scale across geographies, scale to a larger user base. And I think when we're looking at a problem that is going to take us 150 to 200 years to actually reach repair, look, there's very important things to do this decade, next decade, the decade after that. These are the decades where we're going to lose most of nature, right? Luckily, there'll be a little bit of nature hanging on just long enough, like in little pockets that we could pull it back from, just long enough for us to be able to work this out over a couple hundred years. But if we don't start talking about the tools to be able to go scale in time, we're going to really miss the opportunity that is in front of us. Now let's talk about some of those tools to scale in time. And we'll start with the biggie, which is grief. Now this is a photo of me in Hawaii. I'm immediately below my hand. There's a 300-pound green sea turtle saying hi. I guess I'm saying hi, who knows? And in the top right is the neighborhood I lived in. That's the bay, near where I lived, or like a little inlet of the bay. The bay is a little bit out from there. And if you popped in the water, you would see something like what you would see in the bottom right. And I lived next to this reef for about 5 years. I got to know it really deeply. It was filled with colors of every color, corals of every color of the rainbow, life coming out of every pocket and pore. And then in the year 2011, I watched that reef go from that state to gray and brown and no life in less than 2 months. And when you live next to a reef, you really start to get to know it like an apartment complex or a neighborhood. Watching that reef die was like watching all of my friends and neighbors die and move away. And even though I'm a scientist and an engineer, I don't really have better language for it than it felt like it left a hole in my heart. And I needed to go do something about it. It's actually for this reason I ended up quitting my amazing executive job at Google to kind of have no job other than to try to figure out how to go change the trajectory of this, this thing that is actually going to wipe out all coral reefs by the year 2055. I got an early taste of it in 2011, and it's horrible. Now, grief sounds like a terrible thing. It's the emotion that a lot of times we're scared of. It's maybe, if we have any respect for grief, we think about it, it's like, oh, that person is grieving, leave them alone, let them kind of, go off in their isolation. But I would submit to you guys that grief is something a lot more powerful than that. Grief is a compass. Grief is a portal. Grief gives us clarity on the things that actually deeply matter. I thought I was working on what deeply mattered. I had an amazing job, leading product experience for Google X, working on self-driving cars and Google Glass and Project Loon and a contact lens that can measure your glucose levels, inventing crazy things. Sounded like the best job in the world, amazing pay. And also, I did not realize that wasn't important to me compared to this, right? You need moments of grief to find out what really matters to you. And until then, you're going to live the scripts that society tells you are important to live. And until then, you'll live into the things that feel good enough, work good enough, pay well enough. And I'm going to tell you that grief will come for you with the times that are coming. But don't be afraid of grief. Grief is the portal. Grief is the thing that makes you care about something for your entire life. And when we're talking about the tools of intergenerational care, having a tool that allows you to care about something for your entire life is an amazing tool, because it needs to not just be one life. It needs to be several generations in a row of lives that care this deeply. Now, that is a very deep and powerful tool, and when it comes for you, don't fight it. It is the moment. It is the portal. It will feel extremely difficult. It might take you years to get through. But on the other side of it, you will find clarity in the things that you really want to fight for decades. And that's the type of fight that we're in. Now, how else have other societies and other parts of nature solved this problem of doing intergenerational care, achieving goals over hundreds of years? Well, this image is from the Iowa tribe. I visited them in Kansas. And if you look at the close-up, which is over on the side of the images there, their society was formed into 9 different clans. And every one of those clans was earmarked to go and get to know and take care of a specific species. And if you look at the species up there, you got the wolf, you got the beaver. Sadly, you have the passenger pigeon, which is the major pollinator of North America, the bison, right? And to a T, every single one of those 9 species that they form their societies around is a keystone species. And in that, they already showed us something really powerful, right? If your generational goal is for your society to go take care of its keystone species, you can last for an incredibly long time. And this is another way that we're able to go encode goals over a longer period of time in the basic fabric of society. But that's not the only way. Right? The keystone species insight they were not the only ones that discovered it. If you go and look at the totem poles of the Pacific Northwest and you look at the specific animals that are part of ceremony, part of ritual, then you'll see that almost all of those are keystone species as well. In the middle we have the Yaquit people, where in their shamanic rituals they basically embody the deer, which is one of their keystone species. And other times you can do it the American way. So we decided that this is our bird. So we got real sad when DDT was killing it. And ultimately, I don't care whether you do it through dance or myth or national bird or totem poles or what have you, but we need to start talking about these kinds of tools. The tools that will have us consistently care about something for decades, for generations. Now, beyond those sorts of tools of society, nature has shown us really powerful tools as well. And this is a recent scientific discovery from 2021. We found the first eusocial plant. So this is basically eusocial. If you don't know, it means it forms societies. So this is a plant that has formed a society. And basically, there's different roles in the society of these closely related plants. Some of them that are closer to the canopy direct water toward the core family. The ones that are closer to the ground basically are kind of sponges for nutrient flow. And all of them basically contribute to their total society in these various ways. And the reason I bring this up is that, even though I get to do this fancy job and I work with people that are went to all these great universities, then these are not the only jobs that will matter, right? Like my dad worked at the post office for 30 years. And that's basically not a job that is kind of seen in high dignity anywhere. But then the pandemic hits, and all of a sudden, it's the nurses and the post folks and the people that are cooking and delivering our food, which are suddenly the most important people in the world. And the truth is that they were never not important, right? And if we are to go and last through these generations, we need to re-dignify all these different elements of work, right? Because it won't just be the entrepreneur like doing a hotshot pitch on stage, or the person who had a great exit, or the person on the cover of a magazine. It is also going to be the post workers. It is also going to be the folks that are the solar installers. It's also going to be the people that are changing out heat pump systems. It's also going to be the people climbing ladders and nailing things in every day. That is deeply dignified work where we need to think differently about as a society as to how it matters to us. Right, and grief will ask, yes. Grief is going to ask that of you too. And I got to close out soon because I'm already like 2 minutes over time. But another thing to go learn from nature is that culture is not just for entertainment. And that's basically what we've made in recent times. We've basically made everything entertainment. Politics is entertainment now. It's just a big sports match. And the problem is that it's not, right? Like, entertainment gets the highest ratings, which is why everything's become entertainment, but it's not that. And culture is not just entertainment. Absolutely, aspects of culture, feed into entertainment. But when you look at orcas, for example, their culture is that they teach from generation to generation is about survival. It's about thriving. It's about hunting grounds. It's about techniques. It's about ways of caring for each other. They have long lineages of names that they give each other. Right? And culture can be formed and be that powerful. It doesn't need to just be the latest fashion trend or this reality TV show or some song we forget about in 2 weeks. We need to reclaim culture for ourselves. It is not about entertainment. It is about our survival deeply. And the last thing I'll leave you with, given that this will take generations to go through, I mentioned that I lost my coral reef, and shortly after I lost my coral reef, I met all these coral scientists, including Ruth Gates. And I remember after meeting her, she was such a bright light. I thought to myself, like, man, probably the future of coral reefs, like 70% of it hangs on the kind of work that she's doing. And then in 2018, she passed away. And I remember, thinking to myself, like, she spent so much time with me. She taught me so much stuff. It's like, it means that I need to carry this now. And I don't think I can carry anything nearly as big as what she was carrying, but I can carry, the possibility of that. I can carry the thread that I'm able to bring forward. And all of us need to ask that question of our heroes, because we will live long enough to see our heroes die. Whether it's Ruth Gates or E.O. Wilson, who didn't live long enough to see Half Earth start, or Gabe Brown, who's not dead. Yay, Gabe Brown is not dead. But he did get diagnosed with ALS, which means he might have maybe 4 or 5 years. And given that I'm spending as much time with him as possible as well to go absorb everything about regenerative agriculture that's possible. And this is part of what it is to be part of this continuum, to be a good learner, to learn from our heroes, to carry on the work, and understand that, we will pass on as well. And a generation beyond that will pass on. And maybe that generation at that point is going to see the final fruits of this work that we've done for the last 150 years. Thanks so much.